All right. Let's talk about Neuralink and if it's going to replace memory training, if it's going to replace the memory palace technique, and generally the interesting topic of technology and memory and the brain, and what we can say is possible now, what's actually happening now. Can we even get a clear picture of what's happening now? Does anybody even know what memory is? And if they do, please enlighten us because it's not entirely clear what memory is. If you're joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. And there's a number of reasons why I don't think that even if we have the best neural interfaces with computers, we will ever get rid of or even want to get rid of the memory palace technique. And I'm going to proceed towards the ultimate reason at the end. I think it's the end game move, the checkmate reason. I'd be curious to know what you think, but also I'd be curious to think what reasons you also have in mind and what your thoughts are about Neuralink, either now while we're on the live stream or if you're watching the replay in the discussion below. And one of the important things to really understand here is that we are going to have things change one way or the other. And good to see Cronenwoman walking here. Thank you so much for the super chat. That's really kind and wonderful. And for some reason, your chat doesn't show up on the screen when you do that, so I'm going to just add that there. You say, can't wait for the replay. I have to go to sleep soon. I will say this, I want to do for myself what Elon Musk wants Neuralink to do for me. Excellent. That's an interesting and wonderful and powerful position. And in some sense, that's what we're going to lead to at the end of this. In fact, that desire is sort of foreshadowing exactly where that I think that this is going to go and where it will stay, regardless of what technology comes. But before we get, and thank you again for that super chat, Grown Woman Walking, excellent. I really appreciate it. And incidentally, for those of you who are not in the loop about all of this, that really does help support this channel because these productions that we do week after week are funded by you. And the more that we have, the more we're able to improve that. And the team over here in Team Magnetic Memory Method World really appreciates it as well, because that's just how the world operates, and it seems that it will continue to do so. So all of which is to say, really, really appreciate that support. And of course, Cronenberg Walking also has the masterclass and the mastermind, which is wonderful as well. And something we'll talk about with the Neuralink issue is the role of entrepreneurialism in all of this, because it's very, very important, and it's one of the reasons definitely why Neuralink will never replace memory training or memory palaces, at least as far as I can see. However, let's establish some ground rules. If you're just joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. And this live stream is not a criticism of Neuralink whatsoever. Now, I have in the past done a podcast. The link to that podcast is below, about the 7 reasons why having a memory implant would suck. All of that is still true, but it's not really a criticism. It's not skepticism either, and it's certainly not technophobia. So Shane is in the house. Good to see you, Shane. Thanks for saying hello. If you're joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, and let's make this a nice session today. But just so that my cards are on the table here, I did a PhD in humanities, and part of my field requirements were history of science, history of religion, and in science was technology and history of language. So science and technology. So I find this very, very interesting for reasons that we'll get into, but I'm not a Luddite. It's not even clear that Luddites existed anyway, in the way that we're often told. If anything, I'm more of someone who shares the general philosophy known as Genshi Genbutsu. Now, this is a Japanese term that is used in the entrepreneurial world. If you're interested in its origin, it essentially comes from, I believe, Toyota. And it means go to the real place and see for yourself. And this is an important guiding metaphor for everything we're going to talk about with Neuralink. And everything that has to do with memory palaces, is to go to the real place and see for yourself. So for those of you who are into memory techniques, this is an opportunity to look at something like this, Genshi Genbutsu, and think about how you're going to memorize that term, right? And you can use this opportunity if you like. I know it's summer, everybody's a little less active than usual, but you can think about what your magnetic imagery might be for that term. So would you use Sega Genesis, for example, with a Chia pet? Would you use two Sega Genesis and a big fat butt that is engaged in a lawsuit? Or what would you do there? That'd be very interesting to know. How you would remember Genshi Genbutsu. In any case, this is a thing that we'll come back to a few times. Go to the real place, see for yourself. And it's really, really important. And speaking of going to the real place and seeing for yourself, there is a old but new, and new but old, a video with Brad Zupp. We previously recorded a podcast, and we talk a little bit about Japanese in that podcast, and we talk about going and seeing. And so he is a great exemplar of going and seeing and actually putting things into action and seeing what happens when you get there. So there's actually 2 interviews with Brad Zupp. This is the first video version, and the second one will follow eventually. But don't miss his knowledge if you haven't yet, and there's some interesting things there. But let's get started with the first reason why I don't think that this is going to replace memory palaces or memory training anytime soon. And as we get into that, hit the thumbs up, let me know where you are in the chat, and make it active. So the first problem here is planning fallacy. So when Elon Musk put this out, is within a year sort of plan. And so I think my original podcast about why memory implants would suck was 2017-ish, and now it's 2019, and there's obviously more reality in the progress so far compared to the previous announcements, and it's really not as streamlined as one would think. And planning fallacy is something really, really important to understand, because we always think things will take shorter period of time than they actually do. They take much longer than we think, except for in memory training, because there are so many people within a couple of hours who can figure this out and then go off and win memory competitions, or like Eldon Clem, 1,000 words in 6 weeks in a very difficult language, ancient Ethiopic, and Amanda Markham did 200 words in 10 days in another very difficult language, and this is just with very, very small amounts of exposure to memory training, and they're off to the races, right, when you get a good memory training. So sometimes planning fallacy is not complete across the board. It doesn't express everything. But when it's very complicated with multiple moving parts and millions of dollars and potentially thousands of researchers involved and thousands of test subjects involved, this is more like reality. So I don't think this is going to replace memory training anytime soon. Although if it did, so be it. I can't see that being a problem either. But planning fallacy is important. And we see a lot of planning fallacy in the world of Elon Musk. Elon Musk said, punctuality is not my strong suit. Sometimes I'm not on time, but I get it done. I've underlined I and it because those are other fallacies, such as the fallacy of the individual, the lone agent. There's no I in these projects. And when someone generalizes to the point of, sometimes I'm not on time, but I get it done, who is I and what is it? Anybody who understands, who has any experience in entrepreneurialism, knows that you're making this stuff up as you go along, right? Genshi Genbutsu, you go to see. So there's an issue there to keep in mind, and this is from someone who has talked about this and is remarkably transparent and watchable in many media and formats to see how this can go. So planning fallacy, we can go a little bit deeper into it. It's been around for a while. Daniel Kahneman talked about it as early as 1979, And to dig deeper into what it is and how it works, optimism bias causes underestimation of time needed. So what is optimism bias? Well, it's just thinking optimistically that things will come together much sooner than they most likely will, and that will compress the time needed. Now, again, we have a paradox because in memory training, there are people read half a book, they go and win the World Memory Championship 6 months later with 5 minutes, 10, 15 minutes a day of practice, and they don't even know if they are optimistic or not because they don't know if they're going to win or not because it's a contest, right? So this is not necessarily something that conditions everything, but planning fallacy certainly does condition a lot of things. And one example is the book that I'm working on now, which I'm very delighted to announce that William was here to help plan the photography for the book, because the book has a number of photographs, and it's very, very difficult because also one of the ideas that came out of it is he's going to create a schematic map, and it's going to maybe be a 2-page map, and then with numbers showing all of the stations in this large memory palace for a large memorization project of 32 verses. And it's quite a complex thing to explain to anybody because some of those verses repeat and you have to refer back to them. So I didn't even begin to account for how much time was going to be needed just to do the photographs in the book because I didn't even know what was possible until that I got some outside help. Likewise, here is the plan for a memory game that I came up with the other day, and I know this is going to take a very, very long time to just figure it out, the ins and outs, this memory game. But I'm hoping to put it out. But I have optimism that, I got this idea, and I'm going to get it done in 3 weeks, You see this with Kickstarter campaigns all the time. I was thinking, hey, maybe I should do a Kickstarter campaign for this new memory game that I've designed. And then, all the pressure would come because people would be like, where's my memory game? And, then we found out that this paper stock, blah, 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 blah. Things take time, especially when there's multiple moving parts. There's entrepreneurialism involved. There's suppliers that you have to work with, all kinds of technology. In this case, lots and lots of scientists and lots of test subjects. So we've got to keep that in mind. And Monst is here. Good to see you, Monst. And you say, so memory apps don't matter. I'm not saying that memory apps don't matter necessarily. I'm just saying that there's a number of issues that even with the best memory apps under the sun, it's not going to replace memory training or memory palaces. And we'll get deeper into this as we go along. If you're joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world. You guys are really quiet these last couple months. I guess it's summer, right? I'm not complaining. I don't really mind. But it does tell the robots that people care about the memory tradition when you're active. And of course, these are a lot more fun when people are active. But if you're not the fun people, that's okay. We won't tell Batman. And we won't tell Robin. And we won't tell any of the people in the universe about this. It's our secret. It's our secret. 80-20 rule in effect. All right. So we got resources as part of the planning fallacy. We've got professional competence also as part of the fallacy, which we'll get into that point in just a second, because that's one of the hugest ones. And Elon Musk, as we just saw in that previous quote, has admitted, fessed up to professional incompetence. And that's something that hits all of us, everybody. And then we have things like ethics approval, right? So they're talking about, good to go in a year. Well, I've been in the academic world for some time and seen ethics committees not only take forever to get anything approved, but also do a lot of skanky things in order to push things through, and then it winds up causing a lot of trouble later because of legal issues and all kinds of games to be played when that happens. Also, we can expect that there are going to be thousands of vegetized test subjects, to be sure. You're talking about using a sewing machine as being postured to go into the brain. And you can just imagine, there was a guy some years ago, Michael Gusman, if memory serves, who was on my podcast. He had brain injury from a car accident. And a lot of people don't know that when you have a car accident, you actually have two accidents. You have the car hitting whatever it hits, and then you have your body hitting the inside of the car. Potentially three accidents, because then you have your brain hitting the inside of your skull, right? And so we're talking now, and again, as I said at the beginning, this is not criticism, it's not skepticism, and it's not technophobia, but we're talking about putting thin wires into the brain, which I am aware that they already do for certain blind situations, and people are seeing simple shapes and all of this sort of stuff. But this is something of a different nature, where we're going to weave somehow little thin wires into the brain, and we can expect thousands of vegetized test subjects. I'm almost sure. If you don't know what I mean by vegetized test subjects, I'm talking about, I saw a guy yesterday walking down the street, and he clearly had hit his head too hard, and he was not part of the human species in the same way as I assume we all are, because of how he was shuffling around. And when you're going to penetrate the brain and weave through cells that most authentic and honest scientists will admit they just simply don't understand. Wow. There are people who still think that ear piercing is a huge part of digestive issues because of interruptions in your ear that are connected to your gut. And I don't know whether that's true or not, but just imagine going through your brain with little wires. Woo! Then we have the issue of organ rejection, right? So I had a girlfriend in Germany one time, and she was really fascinating because she was a specialized nurse in the heart transplant unit of a hospital. And just the sheer amount of work that goes into preventing the body from rejecting a new heart. Just imagine what's going to happen with implant rejection. Now, that's actually just physical rejection, right? So the physical rejection is one thing, but what about the psychological rejection? Assuming that you can actually make the interface, what about the psychological rejection? Bernie is here in the United States, having great weather. Interesting topic. Thanks for being here, Bernie. Thanks for saying hello. If you're joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, how things are going, what you think about Neuralink and some of these issues. So let's assume that there's going to be some kind of rejection on at least two levels, psychological and physical. Now, again, when we go to the planning fallacy, we've got to plan really what they're going to do when these things go wrong. What are the contingencies and so forth? And then the sheer amount of talent that's going to be needed for this. And when we look at Tesla's history, there's already a history of slow production schedules, talent retention problems in the company. And look, again, I have some experience with entrepreneurship myself. I understand these sorts of things. These are all surmountable issues, but they're there, and we need to take into account that this is not going to be an overnight game, and certainly not within a year, as was being discussed here. Now, I think there's a reason why there's a year in the presentation that Elon Musk gave, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But we have a number of things where the status of Hyperloop, for example, has kind of disappeared. What's going on with Mars and so forth. There's a kind of interesting number of things in the air, which is very common in the world of entrepreneurship. Why? Because of 80-20 rule. You're only going to hit so many targets, right? And the more targets you have in the air, the more you have the chance to hit some of them, right? So that's part of what's going on here. And we need to take that into account when we're thinking about if this sort of technology would replace memory training and memory palaces. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. And there is a bit of a lottery being played here. Look, the more shots you take, the more wins that you have. And so I certainly applaud having all these sorts of ideas. Physico is here. Long time no see, Physico. Good to have you here. You say the principal reason for Neuralink is worse than the Memory Palace is simple. Price. No price is low enough to surpass the freebie that is the Memory Palace. Greetings, Dr. Metivier. Well, greetings, Physico. Good to see you. It's been a while. That's an interesting point, actually, yeah. you can. It's hard enough to get people to take free memory training. So what are we going to do when it comes to getting implants, even if implants were free? That's an interesting point to think through, and I definitely want to think that through further, the whole notion of price. And obviously the expense needs to be taken into account. I'm not that worried about expense, however, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But after, and incidentally, these reasons are not necessarily in a hierarchy, but there may be some ways that they more naturally or better interlace with one another, so to speak. So I'm not sure that planning fallacy is in the right spot in our talk today, but the next one is novelty fallacy. And so we can see in this cartoon here, there's the original cure-all ointment and the all-new cure-all ointment, and this sheeple here, well, must be better, says here's new, right? And so a lot of people, they think there's something new in this Neuralink stuff, and there's lots of novels. Michael Crichton was writing novels about this in the 70s, and even previous to this, there's many things. We can go back deeper and deeper into history and think about these kinds of machine-human interfaces, and it's sort of a new spin on a very, very old idea. But here's the thing. This whole Neuralink is not only premised on very, very old ideas, but it still sounds old because they're using terms like sewing machine in terms of how that this is going to interface with the brain, in terms of how they're going to technologically link itself. Now, that also is interesting because it's very realistic, right? That it's going to have to be sewn. But this is Elon Musk, people. And so my number one question is, why not improve fMRI and work on non-invasive solutions from day one? Why, if you follow Elon Musk for a period of time and go back to first principles and all that sort of stuff, sewing machine kind of makes sense. But at the same time, when they already have people controlling machines just by thinking, why are they saying within a year we're going to put threads into your, to have neuronal stitching or neuronal lacing, right? When we could maybe have a bigger game here. So I'm kind of curious, what's with the old tech talk when we could be thinking a little bit more forward based on what's already happening in terms of non-invasive human brain machine interfacing? I don't quite get it. So that makes me think of the moonshot. And moonshot is really entrepreneurial stuff. Shoot for the moon. Have as many projects as you're going for venture capital and Silicon Valley buzz, because people have to do something, they have to have things to invest in and so forth, and raising capital that can then be put here, there, and the other place. Just because you're raising capital for this particular brand, this particular product, this particular idea, doesn't mean that it's going to go in that direction. And it's just another shooting for the moon sort of thing in order to raise capital. And so think about those things, because we know where they go. And all you have to do is compare this idea to Theranos, which I encourage you to look up on your own and see what happened there. And when back to Physico's point about price, the price is not just what money it will cost. There's also the price of what it will cost to actually have this in your head. So I would wait for Elon Musk, I would wait for Ray Kurzweil, and I would wait for, a president of a major first world country to be wearing these neural laces in their heads, because then you'll know that it's something that they want to invest in terms of their body. I don't know that that's necessarily a logical metric to impose here, but it's something that I would consider having as a stopgate in your own mind as you're considering these things, regardless of price, assuming you could afford it. But if Buffett has one, maybe. But generally, when it comes to venture capital and Silicon Valley buzz and so forth, the people who sell it rarely use what they sell. And there's a very interesting entrepreneur who still uses a fax machine, and people don't believe that he doesn't do anything with the internet. He doesn't have an email address and all this sort of stuff. I believe it because people who are really, really wealthy, they own things. They don't use them necessarily, right? And the fact that there's very wealthy people who can only be contacted by fax machine today should tell us a lot. Today being the 23rd of July in Australia, 2019. All right, so keep those things in mind. If you're just joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. And this idea of waiting for people to wear their own neural laces connects with our Genchi Genbutsu concept that is guiding our talk today. All right, now, in terms of other problems that I see that ensure, and obviously the big kingpin move is still coming until at the end. My biggest reason will be the final reason, but we also have definition problems. So they're talking about a whole brain interface. And my first question when we talk about a whole brain interface is, what is the brain? Who knows this? Like, who has this definition here of what the brain is? And that, I don't mean to be silly, but when we have people who are still like thinking about how having your ear pierced can lead to digestion problems, and the thoughts about the brain or the gut as your second brain and so forth, what exactly are they on about, right? And then what is the brain on AI? Remember those commercials? This is your brain on drugs. And they would have a frying pan with eggs. I remember Bill Hicks had a great routine about that, where he would talk about, how he never saw a brain that looked like an egg and all that sort of stuff. Very, very funny. But we have these definition problems. And so what is an interface between something that people don't really fully understand and something that people don't fully understand? There's AI is not really understood. There's no agreement on what AI is. There's no agreement on what the brain is. So how are we going to have whole brain interface? Terms matter, and when they fall apart and they're meaningless, then we have to really question when exactly this is going to happen, and to whom it's going to happen, and how exactly. We also have definitional problems right now that we're facing in terms of freedom of thought, expression, freedom of speech. We have people being erased from the public square, and that's a big problem. We also have the free and open internet issue, which, I think Kazakhstan recently just announced or was announced in the news that they're closing off entire expanses of the internet. So what would it mean, a whole brain interface? To what? The whole internet is in contest right now, and this is very, very, very problematic. And so within a year, you're going to be able to interface with what exactly? What the internet is not even established. There's still wars and battles and entire countries that block access to it, etc. So this is something to really, really consider. We're very, very far away from a stable and established internet, as far as I can see. That's something to consider. And we also just don't know what free will is. Really, we don't know what consciousness is. We don't know what it is to have a conscious experience. We're quite far from these sorts of things. Physico says yes, and also if there exists a hacker of computers, could there exist a hacker of Neuralink brains? Yes, and so the whole Bluetooth sort of interface that's being talked about here is a bit of a scary proposition, given what can happen with Bluetooth connections. All right, so now we also have the whole problem of cybernetics, what that means, what is a cyborg, etc. And so we can look at all kinds of diagrams like this till we're blue in the face. But one of the things I would suggest that you go back to, I think it was from 1948, is Norbert Wiener's book Cybernetics, or Control and Communication in the Animal and Machine. Sorry, I got a typo there. This is a really interesting book. It's quite dated, and obviously there's lots of things that have been corrected since then, but I would recommend everybody read it. And one of the things that Wiener does in this book is he talks about how he came up with the term cybernetics and what that means. And he's really talking about a helmsman that is steering. But steering over what? You know, that reference to the ancient Greek brings to my mind the river Styx. And there's a lot of death anxiety, I think, in some of why people develop these technologies, why we want to go to Mars and so forth, that is something to be concerned about. We're being a helmsman, steersman with cybernetics and all of this technology towards what and for what purpose? Yes, I get the whole thing about repairing paralysis that people may have and so forth. Absolutely. But in terms of the fear that the human brain won't keep up with the speed of information, I don't really quite see how that's an issue or how that's a problem. It's confusing to me, given that AI hasn't been defined yet in any sufficient way whatsoever, and that we still don't really have an idea of what the brain how that should be defined. And so I think we have to go back to some of those earlier texts and earlier thinkers like Wiener, because that original impulse to name cybernetics is very, very telling in many, many ways. So I don't want to go that deep into it. It may be a whole different talk for a different live stream, because I do want to do a live stream on death anxiety and its role in forgetting, both as something that we need, something that's very healthy, and also the whole role of basically why we need to forget, and why we need to actually be able to impose forgetting. And these sorts of things would potentially remove the ability to forget, maybe in a positive way, but almost certainly in a way that's going to take some time to get adjusted to. Bunny Girl is here. Excellent. You're in good timing, Bunny Girl, because the Matrix is on our next slide. Thanks for being here. If you're just joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. And so another reason why I don't think that Neuralink would ever replace the need for memory training or memory palaces is that training is never going to go away. I like this funny variation on the I know Kung Fu thing. I am now fully versed in the Chinese wushu discipline commonly referred to as Kung Fu. Would you kindly display to me this newly acquired knowledge of martial artistry? That's very funny. And it's funny because if you know the Matrix, and if you really make yourself a student of what is being said in that movie, including its references to the allegory of the cave in particular, then you know that this training sequence that follows this I know Kung Fu scene is just one of endless training sequences. He never knows Kung Fu. He never knows it. He never actually knows what it is to be the one, because to be the one is to be the one. Right? And you have to continually train yourself in order to be the one. To Month's point here, the Matrix has more meaning to the spiritual awakened person. It is totally about spiritual awakening. And one of the things that we need to understand here is that even if Neuralink is a wild success, what it will be is still the experience of consciousness. It will not be an addition to the experience of consciousness. It will not be a subtraction from the, well, it could be a subtraction from the experience of consciousness, but it will still be an experience of consciousness that, because of the nature of time, will be now. Now, it is possible that we will have our eyes opened to all kinds of different things about what time is and multiple dimensions and all kinds of things that we can't know, but quite possibly, theoretically, it will be still just the experience of right now. And you can't really add anything or take anything away from the experience of right now, because what is right now is always full and completely what it is right now, right? And that's what it is to be the one. It is to be fully and completely in the now, right? And in order to maintain that, you always continually have to train. You always have to train a multiple level of skills, one of which is just mindfulness of the situation and to understand that you are not what is happening, right? What is happening is actually being observed by what you are, and it is an object, so to speak, that happens before and in front of your observation of it, but you are not really that thing, right? And so in order to be able to maintain that awareness, if you have it, you need to train to do so. And I am quite convinced that you will need to train to do so even if you have some sort of human-computer interface going on. So, Physico says, Doctor, our ability to forget is helpful, but let's just say it helps in times we don't need and abandon us when we need the most. If Neuralink could adjust this ability, that would make me think about acquiring it. It's possible. I just don't think that we can I don't think we can generalize in the way that you're doing about the role of forgetting. And one of the issues here, which we're not really going to get into today, is just simply who's going to control the flow of information into your new interface, right? Will you be able to shut it off? Will you even want it to shut off? Look, I don't have my dumb phone around here, but we're finding it very, very difficult to not have our dumb phones with us, right? And there's just people just wired to this thing. And imagine you get it in your head and it's already, spiking your dopamine and so forth, and you're just on. Maybe sleep will disappear, etc. But you can just bet, and you can listen to me go on and on and on more and more about this in the link below to the memory implant podcast, where I demonstrate, I think, quite well why that it will suck. But it's not going to be about forgetting. It's going to be about your attention. And it's going to be about constantly hooking you to more and more consumption of information as opposed to actually application and using it. And so I don't think that we're going to replace the need to train to use things. And those who will train, who will understand that mastery is continually training, as we see in the Matrix, and it's a very important part of the message of the Matrix, you will never stop training. That's what mastery is. That's what it is to be the one, is to be the one who continually trains. Trains to do what? Trains to be the one who is aware and mindful that you are not the thing that you think you are. The world is not what you think it is, and you do not have to be personally involved in it because it is an object that appears in your awareness, right? And so that's a bit of a mind puzzle, but if you really study it and practice, you will become aware of that, and you can maintain that awareness and hold on to it. All right, so this will not replace the need for training, and I think that even if all of this works out tickety-boo, as some of the entrepreneurs and the investors just falling over themselves to invest in Neuralink at the moment, even if this is wildly successful and so forth, I do not think it will replace the Memory Palace or memory training, for one final reason that I would like to share with you today, and it has to do with martial arts and archery. And also, this is assuming that you can actually switch it off, right? Now, assuming you can switch it off, there will always be people who will want to learn on their own. It will maybe be very niche, maybe very small groups of people who will be interested in doing this, but there will be, I'm confident there will be those people. And assuming you can switch it off, those people will switch it off and will enjoy the experience of doing it on their own. We see this in the tendency of many, many people going back to physical books instead of digital books. The revenge of analog, as it is sometimes called. And it is something, I think, that is essential to what humanity is. Humans are a physical thing, and there's something not quite right about digital. If anybody's seen the Cronenberg version of The Fly, there's a very interesting scene where they use the teleportation devices to teleport a piece of steak. And they can't quite figure out why that the steak doesn't taste right. right? But it just doesn't taste right. There's something synthetic about it. There's something false about it. And they make the comparison of, kissing a baby's cheek, and that feeling of how sometimes wanting, or just kissing anybody's cheek, kissing anybody, that feeling of wanting to have something physically, to almost when you really love someone or you hold them so close, oh, I could just eat you up, right? This is something that is somehow lost in the digital. We're not able to have that experience in quite the same way. And we have the also the problem of the hunter-gatherer syndrome that the internet has switched on, where people are just gathering and gathering and gathering more detail, more digital information that they never actually study, they never properly consume, and they lose track of it, and it's just activity for the sake of activity that people think is an accomplishment, but it's not an accomplishment at all. It's just an activity. And so you haven't really consumed anything, and you certainly haven't turned it into knowledge, and you haven't turned it into wisdom because it hasn't gone into practice. So Bad Ba is in the house. Just got here. Hello. Really like to hear your opinion on this topic. Thanks for being here, Bad Ba. I haven't seen you for a while. Wonderful to see your name. Thanks for being here. If you're just joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are and what you're doing in the world. Really great to see everybody. Humans, letting us know that humans are still out there and alive. All right. So let me know how you're doing, Bad Ba. Great to see you. Bernie says, will there be annoying software updates requiring lots of downtime? If the system is connected to the brain, can it process everything, or will there be copyright restrictions, filters on information processing? Excellent points, Bernie. Thank you for those. And great questions. I don't know the answers to them, except for the obvious, right? There are already software updates, and those do require downtime. And there's so many interesting problems, right, with the internet right now. As I mentioned previously, we have countries that want to shut it down. We have all kinds of article this, article that. They changed the numbers of the articles in Europe, where they're doing all kinds of wonky games to control this flow of information. And that's something that, until those problems are solved, do you want those problems inside your head? They're already in our head anyway, right? But do you want to be hardwired to them? And you mentioned software updates here, but what about hardware updates? You plug into that brain once, and then you're going to, oh, they got a shiny new version X45 of these wires. And yeah, that's one thing I can't understand. As I mentioned previously, I simply cannot understand why they're not working on non-coupling possibilities, because we already have some of those in play. So why not improve them? Not only that, but as you mentioned, copyright restrictions, filters on information processing. Man, there's already something in the blockchain world to consider, which is, and I'm not sure why that it hasn't already happened yet, but I assume that it's coming, which is that there will be a form content connection established through the blockchain. I'm predicting, where you will not be able to play music on your device unless it's encoded in the blockchain that device has paid for that song, or you won't be able to play a movie unless it's encoded in the blockchain that device has paid for that movie. I'm sure that's coming. And so now, because there's going to be some sort of connection between registration of devices and the content through some sort of blockchain coupling, it's very difficult to imagine that anybody who puts this stuff directly into their head isn't signing up for a lifetime of replacement surgeries in the hardware world, not to mention the software updates. And it's tragic in some sense that I have laptops that I can't ever update to new software because the actual hardware won't support the new software, right? It's not there. And there's initiatives and efforts at the moment to actually rewrite the fundamental code that drives computing, because the code that's operating right now has become such a messy kludge. There's so much copying and pasting going on. And I don't know that much about it, so I'm sort of speculating and making a kludge of observations myself. But those things all are signals that this is going to take a very long time, if it's even going to happen. Goat is here. Great to see you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us. And, well, I don't know what too late means, but with the miracle of replays, you can always go back and catch up on anything that you've missed. And Sean is in the house from New Jersey. Thanks for checking in, Sean. Thanks for saying hello. If you're joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. And I'm always curious why in the summer people are so much less active. What is it, hot out there? Here, the heat doesn't slow me down. I'm curious because things have been quiet lately. Or is it that people are a little bit tired of the online politics and removal of people from the internet and so forth that's been going on lately? And maybe there's just a little bit of internet exhaustion going on, because that certainly is getting exhausting. The power struggles over thought. Wow. Unbelievable that this would be the situation that the internet evolved into. Unbelievable. All right, Bad Ba is in Virginia, was about to practice some Memory Palace. We'll listen to the replay. Been following Neuralink for a while. I think it's the future, considering it's a small percent that practice memory skills. Yeah, and I think that one way or another, these things are coming, and I would highly recommend that people just let a couple thousand people, if not a couple million people, try it first and be the guinea pigs, and then sign up later, if at all, because it seems to me that all of this should be possible without an actual biological intervention. Has anybody seen the movie Existence by David Cronenberg? I think David Cronenberg in general is a great person to look through his film catalog, because he foresaw a lot of this coming. Videodrome would be a movie to see, Existence, and The Fly. His version of The Fly, as I was just mentioning. These are very forward-thinking movies and very influenced by Marshall McLuhan, of course, but also thinking about something that's very, very important along the lines of people wanting to learn on their own, and this concept that we had of Genshi Genbutsu, which is humans do this. Humans push the limits. Humans explore things. We do it in art, right? Which is strange that there's been so many restrictions on information lately when there's such radical things to be done in art, right? That push the limits, that transgress. This is something that we do. People want to do this. There's a death anxiety that drives this. There's also a lot of erotic impulses that drive this, and it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But at the end of the day, assuming you can switch it off, there will always be some people that will want to learn on their own. Think of 1984. Think of the impulse that drives Winston Smith to find this little cubbyhole, or whatever you would call it, where he can write in a journal outside of the gaze of Big Brother. I can imagine that even 1,000 years after something like Neuralink would be in place, there'll still be people who will want the freedom from whatever that thing is. People want freedom from their parents. People want freedom from their governments. People want freedom from the textbooks. People want freedom from the constraints of everything. Everything is constraint-based in the world. Everything is rule-based and governed by principles of gravity and all kinds of physics and so forth. People will always want to try to escape those things. And if you adopt this kind of technology, you're potentially giving up your ability to escape any of it, and giving yourself over to a whole new set of rules that will be strange and interesting for those who accept it. But I think here's where I think ultimately there will always be memory training and memory palaces, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I don't think so. And it's that some people will always want to compete. So we have guns, we have tanks, we have drones, and yet people show up day after day, probably millions of them around the world, to study martial arts. to learn how to fight with nothing more than 2 hands and 2 legs, their heads, and all that sort of stuff. Mixed martial arts, whatever. There's an urge to be able to survive unassisted. And there are memory competitions all over the world. One just happened in Canada, in a library on 6th Avenue in New Westminster, which is really interesting because I have memory palaces in that library. And I think that assuming you could switch this stuff off, even if it's only a small group of people, there will still be people who will find out about this memory tradition and they'll say, damn, that's cool. I'm going to go do that. I don't care how many boats there are. I don't care how many surfboards there are. I don't care how many yachts and cruises there are. People will still want to learn how to swim. I'm quite confident of that. So this is something to consider. And I think it's the ultimate reason why that we'll always have this, assuming you're allowed to turn it off. And maybe there's a problem in my thinking here, because cheating would be so easy and hard to trace and indetectable. So maybe there would have to be some sort of, I don't know, force field to block any signals that people who have these devices could use to cheat. Because, there's an interview with Dominic O'Brien where he talks about how that cheating is a problem in the memory competitions already, and he's often brought in, if I recall the interview correctly, he's part of helping to look for cheating in the memory competitions. So maybe people will not always compete, but I think that as long as they can find a way to turn these devices off or to interrupt any sort of signals that might be helping people cheat, there will be memory competitions, and there will be people who will want to do this. There are still people, even though they have guns, who like to bow hunt. They like to knock an arrow on the bow and shoot a deer. And I think that will continue so long as there are deers to hunt or targets to shoot at. As long as there are humans. I don't know. Maybe I got to go watch WALL-E again, and maybe everybody will just float around in spaceships and get fat and not use their legs and so forth. But I don't think that's going to happen, because as long as there's a human brain that is healthy, it's going to want to take care of the body that houses it. So there will be physical training. And as long as there's that impulse to physically train, there will be a human species, because that's what humans are. And I don't think these implants are going to change that. And if you look at what part of the way that this is being offered has to do with, is helping people who have lost their legs be able to walk again, etc., etc. Whether or not it's going to be able to do that or not sufficiently, who knows? But there is that potential there, and we will go into some pros of what this interfacing might mean in a minute. But this is the number one reason why I think it would always persist. And I believe in my most optimistic mind that, imagine there are kids 1,000 years in the future who are just implanted to the nth degree. Curiosity will still exist, I imagine. Hopefully, it doesn't have to be taught, and they'll hear about these people who go and switch their devices off. They train their memories to be able to memorize information without any help whatsoever, and they do it because they want to learn on their own. They want to feel what it was like to be those ancient Jehudis back in 2019 who had to actually remember stuff for tests without any help. And some of them will want to compete at memory competitions. This is what my optimistic mind says. All right, let's check in with the chat here. Physico says, Doctor, let's be real. Even to this day, not everyone can afford the internet access. If Neuralink catches society's favor, there will be millions of people that still won't get it because of the price. That can be, yeah. What can I say? We don't know. If one thing is certain and true that I've observed, could change with computer-assisted thinking, humans are really bad at predicting the future. I think computers are probably pretty bad at predicting the future as well. I did film studies for many, many years. I taught film studies. And one thing that's always been astonishing is that they still can't predict a winner at the box office. They just can't do it. There are indicators, and there's things that are obviously better to bet on than others. But even with the biggest stars, even with the biggest, best production team, the best directors, the best everything, the best marketing, they still have flops. They still have flops. And so, what can I say? We just don't know. But in terms of millions of people not getting it because of the price, Physico, again, I don't disagree with you, because we already have all kinds of knowledge for free that people won't use. It's right there for you. They won't they won't lift a finger to make use of the knowledge that's in front of them today. You have no idea how many times I get emails where people say, can you just give me a tip, a memory tip? Man, the course is right there. It's free. magneticmemorymethod.com/YT. My tip is to take the course. If you do, and you do what it says there, you will have a better memory. You'll be able to remember much faster with greater depth and integrity and so forth. You you have to fight to give it away for free. Some people ask me, could you do more memory science? When I do, oddly enough, people tend to, like, I've had surveys go out and everybody wants more memory science. You put out some memory science, nobody actually watches it. So wisdom of crowds. Got to be careful about that, which is another point about this Neuralink debacle. But one of the things that's so interesting is that memory science and science as such has never proven itself to be a very powerful, persuasive tool. It is in certain contexts when it's used in particular ways. Statistical fallacies are all over the place and do persuade people. But the real big kingpin scientific arguments, you can put all the data under the sun, and people, they're going to smoke cigarettes, they're going to drink beer, etc., and they're not going to do anything to help themselves because science isn't going to persuade them that way. So I don't even think it's really a price thing, Physico. It's lots and lots of issues. There's many countries in which you don't have to be homeless, and yet some people still choose to be homeless. And it's a mystery that sociologists have been trying to solve forever. Is homelessness a mental illness? Is it a choice? What is it? We don't know, but some people, they still go and do it. Who knows? Maybe they're more tapped into their primal DNA than others. I don't know. All right. So, Bad Boss says, I agree. I'm sure there will be issues with the first test subjects. Hope it's not too bad. Who knows? Who knows? We can only just do what we can to help them out. Another thing, too, there was an interesting, this comes to mind, there was an interesting caller on the Atheist Experience that I watched yesterday, talking about DMT and PTSD from DMT, and I certainly had some bizarre experiences taking illicit substances when I was way too young to be doing that kind of shit. And wow, that definitely gave me something like PTSD for a number of years. I had breathing issues and anxiety like crazy. And so just imagine what will happen if you have information overflow in your brain, and people will hear about this, and it may be similar to the ways where people will just say, I ain't taking any drug like that, no way. And it can be something similar like that. You'll hear all of these kinds of people with technologically induced schizophrenia, etc. Quite possibly. Month says, about 1% of my country know about the Memory Palace, even the world. Most people like to train. They don't like shortcuts, so fewer people will use it. Yeah, that can be. Bernie says, think Neuralink advertisements directly to the brain. What fun. Well, yeah. And now that you raise the issue of advertisements, Bernie, which I also talk about in the memory implant resource in the discussion below for you if you want to follow up with that. The issue with advertisements that I think we really need to consider is that there's the promise of laser targeting advertisement that I've never quite seen. So I'm always astonished by the budget that is lost for advertisers when YouTube continually, constantly feeds me advertising for cars. I don't drive. I haven't owned a car since I was a teenager. It's not that I don't like driving, but I just, if I drive, I rent a car. And it's just, why do they not know They say within a year they're going to have an interface to the brain. YouTube still does not know that I don't have a car, and I have no plan to buy one. They don't know that I'm never going to download a gambling app because I don't gamble, right? The software just isn't there yet. It should know these things. Heck, I complain every time Siri apparently isn't listening. I'm trying to watch something, and I blah blah blah. Oh damn! Don't these people know that I just, they're not even. If they had any. Oh, and here's another thing that I think is just absolutely astonishing. These companies should be angry. I used to use a particular software for a couple of years. I stopped using it, but even during the years that I was using it, paying for it, I got advertisements again and again and again. Do they not know that I already had it? How much money are they spending advertising to me something that I already use? And I just switched to a different software eventually, and one of the reasons was because that software updated and made itself absolutely utterly useless. It apparently didn't look at its power users. It kept feeding me all of these stats about how I was in the top 10% of all the people using all their stuff, yada 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 yada, which never made me feel good. It's just like, wow, that few people do this little with it, etc. But all of these performance stats and so forth, then they go and change it. They wreck all the cool stuff that they spent 2 years sending me weekly updates about how I was using it, and then they made it impossible to use. So I switched, and now they still advertise to me. The software is not there yet. It should know to protect their ad budget that I'm not going to buy these products. Even when I used them, it didn't know that I was already a customer of them. There's an argument to be said that, continuing to see advertisements for something that you use would increase retention. But then they would have different ads, right? Like, use again ads, which they don't, retention-based ads. So it's far, 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 far off from, and this is planning fallacy that we've already covered today. There's more to say about advertisement and its problems, but at the same time, advertisement works. It's part of society. It is something that I don't think is going to necessarily go away, nor necessarily should it. It's just the nature of the beast. And speaking of beasts, I was having a memory today. When I was a teenager, I went to Vancouver one time, and there were people with red smocks on that said, "Beware the beast," and the right hand implant, 666, all this sort of stuff. And they had these wonderful pamphlets that went into, this chip that you would insert into your hand, and it would have all of your data and, your banking data and so forth. This was around the time that bank cards first came out in the ATM machines, and they had wonderful diagrams and all this sort of phrases from the Bible and so forth. Beware the beast and 666 and woe to you, O earth and sea, kind of stuff. For the devil sends the beast with wrath, for it knows its time is short. Let him who hath understanding reckon that it is a human number. Its number is 666. All that kind of stuff. It was amazing. And I was having that memory today, and it's like, wow, those people, if only they knew what was what was going to come directly into your brain so that they could advertise to you. But yeah, there's a long way to go. So Bad Boss says, the reason behind the development of Neuralink is to keep up with AI, which is rapidly growing. Yes, but as I pointed out earlier, I don't think you were here yet, Bad Boss. AI is not really well defined yet. And we'll probably do a different live stream about this on a different day, but I want to talk about death anxiety and its role in memory. And by death anxiety, I'm talking about very, very classic psychoanalytical death anxiety. I'll refer more specifically to Robert Lang's conceptualization of death anxiety, what it does, why that it makes us forget, and so forth, and why that it's also productive. And I think a lot of what's going on here is death anxiety, not just around AI, but just classic death anxiety that prompts creativity, prompts entrepreneurialism, prompts all kinds of things. It has a positive role to play, so long as there is a human species. But this idea of keeping up with AI is attributing in advance something about the nature of information that I don't think actually is what AI would ever have. It's it's not clear to me, but it's not necessarily something I know enough about to speak too deeply about. And I'm very, very interested in it, but I don't think that it's going to reach that goal of keeping us up with AI when there's not even a definition of what it is. And there's so many different kinds of AI. And to some extent, isn't our intelligence already artificial, right? It's actually as natural as it gets if you take the view that everything under the sun that emerges in reality must be natural, because what else would it be, right? But that said, so many of the things about intelligence and information is invented. It's created by us. They are tools that are external to us. And I think that one of the core anxieties around artificial intelligence that I thought was profound when I read it years ago in my doctoral program was from Jacques Ellul, who wrote The Technological Society, it's called. And in that, he said, here's the real problem. The real problem is that machine A is broken. So how do you fix machine A? Well, humans no longer can fix machine A, because the only thing that can fix machine A is machine B. Machine A does not yet have the capacity to bring machine B over to machine A. So who brings machine B over to machine A? Well, humans do, right? And so if the job of the human is to bring machine B over to machine A, that human is technically, in his view, a slave, right? And so this is very, very interesting, because at that time when I read that book, I remember my computer had a virus. And back then, computers were, like Windows 95 or whatever. They were not what they are today. Far from it. But the only thing that I knew how to do was use a telephone book to call somebody. And that person brought over a CD-ROM. He put the CD-ROM into my computer. He pressed some buttons. And I said, what do we do now? And he said, we wait. And so we waited. And then eventually he said, okay, problem solved. Don't go visiting these websites again. And he took out his CD-ROM, put it into his case, and he took off. So he was the human bringing computer A or computer B to computer A. And that's what his job was. I don't think that he has that job anymore, because it's pretty hard to find a computer that actually accepts CDs anymore. But we still see that sort of role in society. And will that continue or not? I don't know. But if you have the machine in your head, then you're definitely carrying you're carrying it from here to there and so forth. And we are already doing this. We have these things in our pockets all the time. These things tell networks, or people can find out where we are at all times, what we're doing. Do they really need to know what we're thinking directly? No, they already know what we're thinking, but it's still pretty clunky, because they're still showing me ads anyway for cars that I ain't never going to buy, etc. They don't even know that I'm not going to buy cars. But if they can read my mind because of a direct interface, then maybe that will be a positive, because then they'll stop sending me ads for things that they now know I'm never going to buy, but they'll send me ads for, new books and stuff, which could be interesting. All right. So Physico says, the ultimate way to learn anything is with all the constraints on. The emotional reward is humongous. Yes, I agree. And this is what art is. This is what creativity is. It is tangling with the rules, right? And I don't think that's going to go away, even if you have an implant in your head. Let's see. Bad Boss says, eventually AI will be the governed entity if it's able to learn faster than people. So developing tech to assist people is supposed to keep us in line. Look, I'm not sure that AI learns. We use human terminology for things that are not human. And we might say that what it's done is learned something, but is that what has been done by it? I don't know. It's a definitional problem, and we talked about definitional problems already today. So if you missed that, you can go back, watch the replay. But learning is not necessarily what a machine does. Learning is what humans do, and that's the word that we use for what humans do. And there's all kinds of different words. It's like snow, right? There's many, many words for snow. There's many, many words for learning. And so there's multiple AIs, multiple kinds of learning to be done, assuming that what they do is even learning. And we don't know where it's going to go. Bad Boss says there's another specialist that covers science. I love your view. It's more important to practice the skill and get science later. Yes, and let's pause a minute on what science is. Science is the production of evidence that supports claims. And its strength is in how that we can improve the claims that we're making so that we're making more claims that are true insofar as the evidence supports the truth of those claims, and fewer claims that are not true so that we are not leading ourselves into darkness, right? And into bad territory. And bad actors are good at manipulating what evidence, is supporting and what it isn't because of massive volumes of information. And the idea that somehow this AI is going to emerge, that's somehow going to cut through all that darkness and so forth, I don't think so. I think there's going to just be continual evolution of multiple AIs and so forth, and those are going to compete with each other, and it's going to, for a long time, probably add more noise, more darkness, more need for human clarity and wisdom than ever before. And hopefully there will be people who still want to learn on their own and cultivate some wisdom outside of the machine that can help guide all of this. And we'll see, though. We'll see. I really don't know. But I think that there's lots of terminological problems. And when people say that machines learn, I think that they're already in a trap, because machines do not learn. That's a human word used to describe what humans do. And it already is in itself insufficient because it's just singularizing a multiplicity. And that's an issue. If we had a definition for learning that worked, we'd have a lot more smarter people. Don't you think? I think so. Pat is here, says, listening in the Golden Triangle. People think the future will be like the present, only more so. Sometimes things actually change. That's an interesting point that we're going to get to, because when we talk about the pros, the possible pros, my first thing to say there is to talk about the eternal present. When I have thought about writing a book about philosophy, I have thought that I will always call it the eternal present, because to me, in my mind, the best possible outcome for something like humans interfacing with a network that connects each other seamlessly, the best possible outcome would be for people to live in the moment, to live in the present, right? And then we need to think about what will they do when they're living in the present. And quite potentially, they will, I don't know, but we've already had some real wild cats roaming our planet for thousands of years who have figured out, more or less, how to live in the eternal present, how to live in the now. Eckhart Tolle wrote a book that's quite popular that basically teaches you how to do this. Much of what he says there is premised on things in the Upanishads from thousands of years ago. I've memorized a great deal of some of these texts and downloaded, so to speak, the software of that teaching, which I can rattle off anytime that I please. And I'm memorizing some more now. And, the Atmabodha starts, I am composing this treatise for those purified and peaceful. I'm composing this treatise on self-knowledge for those purified and peaceful, calm of mind, free of craving, and desirous for liberation. And so one of the things that I can see here as a pro is that it would make more people desirous for liberation from the tyranny of the untrained mind. And they could potentially accelerate the process towards having a trained mind, potentially. But they would still need to train. And one of the things that may be possible here is communicating to people why this is so easy for them to accomplish in a way that we just are clearly failing to do so for thousands of years. Because the knowledge of how to set yourself free from suffering has been with us for so long. And I'm saying this from a anecdotal level, but I never believed it. I never accepted that it could ever be possible until a couple of years ago when I sat down and said, look, this guy is saying, Gary Weber, in Happiness Beyond Thought, that if you would just do these kinds of meditations and you would do them in this particular way and memorize these texts, then you could defrag your mind and have mental calm and clarity, remove the fear of death, and live more in the present and just have a happy old time. I didn't believe this, but I'm a true skeptic. And a true skeptic is someone who actually goes out and tries and tests and does these things. And so I downloaded the software, so to speak, because he just says, chant these things. And I've been doing it daily for 2.5 years. And man, I have to say, it does work. Now, I'm still a human and still have these moments of despair now and then, but they're very, very short, very fleeting, and it's unbelievable what has happened. It's crazy. It's crazy. And the question is, why hasn't everybody been doing this? And part of the problem is we don't understand what learning is, and we have a problem. We have a problem that not everybody gets this knowledge, and even when they get it, they don't get it. They don't understand why they should do it. They don't understand how it should be done, and they just simply won't. It's the old lead a horse to drink. Now, it is possible that we won't need to have rhetoric anymore. We won't need to have persuasion. We won't need to have schools in quite the same way because, here's the thing. You just put this thing in your head here, and we're going to press this little button, and then we're going to go over here and press this little button, and and then boom, you'll get it. You'll know Kung Fu. You'll still need to train, but now you'll know why. Because there are people who just simply can't sit down and do anything if they don't know why they should do it, right? And there are people who just can't sit down and concentrate on something until they know what something is, what the whole history is. And then there's people that want to know how things work. Well, and they'll never be persuaded to take any action unless all those pieces are in place, assuming that's even possible. But imagine, and then there's people who just want the action steps. They're just like, just give me the instruction manual, I'll figure it out, let's go. Maybe there's more kinds of people, but those are generally considered the 4 learning types. And then inside of that, there are the learning styles, the learning hierarchies, the consumption preferences, etc., etc. Now, if you could just hit all those buttons and have people be convinced to be in the eternal present, bam, like maybe this would happen en masse to the point that it would actually start to roll faster, and people wouldn't just sit there and hum and haw and have all these doubts and worries and concerns, because it will be blatantly obvious to them. Because I really regret that it took until 2.5 years ago for someone to convince me finally to sit down and meditate in a particular way that I had willfully rejected for so long. That can't possibly be so. Turns out it was the way. Now, would it be the way for you or not? I don't know. But at the end of the day, it was for me, and a lot of time was wasted, so to speak, on not doing that. And it was there all along for thousands of years in the instruction manual. No argument about that being the way. So if there was a machine that could say, boop, 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 and I'd go, oh yeah, that makes sense, and I would have done it, man, there could have been years and years and years of thousands of pounds of pressure taken away from my life, hundreds of gigajoules of suffering completely snuffed out, gone, not unnecessary. The suffering is just simply not necessary, and yet it happened, because Mr. Intellectual here had every reason under the sun not to do the most obvious thing that was sitting right in front of you, that was the path to being in the eternal present. So that might be a pro of just wiring people up, is just say, hey, look, man, here's all your doubts. Gone. And you just sit down and do these meditations. Now, I'm not the only guy to say these kinds of things, because there's a book by Shinzen Young called The Science of Enlightenment. And if you read that book very carefully and deeply, deeply, is that a word? Read it carefully and deeply, you'll notice at the end, he talks about how, in the Buddhist tradition, they think, as in many traditions, that there are maybe a Buddha is going to come again, right? And he says, well, if a Buddha comes again, will it be a single dude? Or will it be a technological committee that will help each individual figure out, using computational potential in machines, to help you figure out your awakening, your ability to just be you in the present moment, which is all there is anyway. And with all the razzmatazz things you could add to your mind is all there will be anyway, to the best of my knowledge anyway. I just don't see how that's ever going to change, because all there seems to be is now and the objects appearing in awareness. That's all there ever seems to be. And you can add all kinds of things, but they will still be objects appearing in awareness, right? So what if it's guided by computers that people come to see that? Because you were always already in the eternal present. You were always already 100% full and complete and aware, even if you weren't paying attention to it. You were always already enlightened, right? This is very much so. And if you actually play this through, you will discover it. I'm quite confident of it. There's all the evidence in the world to demonstrate that. It's just only sad that it took me so long to figure it out, but so it goes. And if you could accelerate that, that would be pretty awesome, to live in the eternal presence. And it's possible, potentially. And so this gets us back to the whole thing of Genshi Genbutsu. Go and see. Go and see for yourself. And I wish you all the best discernment in whatever it is that you choose to do with whatever is coming and what happens. So let's see here. Physico says, about the Neuralink rejection, that exists some refusal of the human beings to the new. So yes, maybe some not that much social people will reject willingly, but the general human loves shortcuts. Yeah, well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with loving shortcuts and being interested in shortcuts. But one thing that we know is that shortcuts aren't the answer, and usually the long way around is the fastest path, because we need to master the fundamentals. And so the question really is will enough people have wherewithal and discernment enough? Will they have mastered discernment enough to make the best possible decision? Or will they, because they see a bunch of other people lining up at the Neuralink store at 2 a.m. and parking tents in there to get wired up and have a sewing machine interact with their head, just because they see other people doing it? We don't really know. And, as you say, Physico, the price may be prohibitive, but I'm not sure that it's going to necessarily be an issue of price. We'll see. We shall see. All right. Bad Boss says, I understand what you mean by terminology. The developers use that same term, machine learning, probably guiding the viewers a certain direction. Your question does clear some fog. Is this the right term? Yeah, we always need to think about the terms that we use. We need to think about the limits of language. We need to think about the potential of language. And we need to think about, are we actually hitting the mark? Are we actually reaching a description of what it is that we're trying to describe? And what I hope to cover today was some reasons why that they're not really capable yet of describing what it is that they're talking about, and that there is obviously some attempt to raise capital, and that capital is not necessarily going to the destination that we think, and we just don't know enough about it. We have planning fallacy. We have all kinds of optimism fallacy as well, there's all kinds of terms that we can pull from all kinds of scientists of human behavior where this is there is an issue, but we don't understand the role of free will really well enough to put the cart ahead of the horse, and we just have so many technological issues that that we need to be solving, and yeah, this whole idea of machine learning is possibly not the right term whatsoever. So basically, I'm very much open and optimistic about what could be great for this. But I would think that the ultimate goal, as it says in the Sanskrit, Atmajanam Param Shastram, self-knowledge is the ultimate science. If it will lead to self-knowledge, then I think, well, heck, why not? Because that's what is really needed here. People really need to understand. They need liberation, right? They need to be liberated from the tyranny of the ego that has created an illusion which makes them think that they are something other than what they are. And as long as that prison persists, then there's going to be unnecessary suffering. And so if this is all leading towards the reduction of that suffering, then by all means, I'm all for it. But for now, we know that, or I'm very confident that these technologies will not eliminate practice. And notice that part of the promise here is so that people who can't walk can walk again, which is going to mean that they practice walking, right? So this is a very, very important thing. Also, downloading is not learning, right? So just being able to go through information and graze and gather and so forth, that's already a huge problem. So being able to just have instant access without a interface that you use with your fingers and so forth, that's not necessarily gonna help anything. The mind still needs to train, it still needs to practice, it still needs to apply, and we've got a lot of issues there where people don't do that already. So on the pro side, if this technology will help them get past the need to be motivated, the need to be inspired, and just do it anyway, that could be quite good. But then where do you get to be who you want to be? Where do you get to be human? Humans like to sit on the couch once in a while. They don't want to go and do things just because they know that, oh well, we don't need willpower anymore. We don't need any inspiration or motivation anymore. We'll just leave it to the corporations to decide to zap us at this time. Clockwork Orange, Anthony Burgess. Read that novel while you read in 1984, and Michael Crichton. And, again, it came up a lot in our chat today. If you think advertising is bad now, a lot of people whine and complain about advertising, but, it's only going to get worse when it lives inside of your head. The big platforms that are chewing up your attention span already with advertising that has nothing to do with what you're interested in, and that are telling content creators what to do and how to do it as we speak, people like myself and all sorts of stuff, they're serving the wrong master. They're not serving you. They're serving other interests. So you better believe that one of the first things that's going to happen if implants succeed is that, as Bernie had pointed out, they're going to just fill that space and every possible inch of it with their own outcomes and interests. And of course, software maintenance, as Bernie pointed out, they've got all kinds of updates all the time, and then we've got hardware maintenance as well. So imagine in the flesh hardware maintenance. See the movie David Cronenberg's Existence. It really gets to the core of this. He makes a great relationship between essentially having a human hardware interface in your spine, a bioport it's called in that story, and venereal disease. And this is really something to consider. People do a better job with their pets and their vehicles than they do with taking care of their own bodies. So what are they going to do when they can't clean the wound suppurating in their heads, right? Which is having electrical impulses tied to a wire, Bluetooth wire, blah, 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 you know what I'm saying? It's a and then, how many password management softwares are you also going to need to patch in there, So medical maintenance monstrosities are on their way. And Physico keeps bringing up the whole point about price and price and price and price. The reality is that, and why I keep saying I'm not so much worried about the cost of getting it, there's going to be the cost of not getting it, right? Because of how, if it all works, how people will fail to be competitive on the market if they're not somehow assisted, assuming that it works and assuming that it can be trained. Then we have the issue of all kinds of governance and the crackdowns that are going on as we speak, with bureaucracies finally catching up to what the technology can do, what's going to happen with the blockchain and so forth. This can be quite terrifying, and if you're not up on those issues, you might want to, even though they're not that pleasant. But as they say, ignorance is far from bliss. Another issue too that I think we need to consider is that they keep talking about recording memories. Well, it's not clear that memories are recorded. They're more generated than they are recorded, as far as we know. But keep that in mind. Look into that on your own. And we have already the problem with internet addiction. So what are we going to do when you can't ever turn it off and you can't take it out? But again, I think that there are some pros. I think there's one major pro, and I think there's one argument for why it will never replace the memory palace. And we covered those today, so I hope you enjoyed. And Bernie says, if my internet connection is slow, will my IQ drop like a rock? Well, we talked before on these live streams about how I think that IQ is a nothing subject and not really a metric to be bothered with. If you can memorize it and you can use your memory to learn, what does it matter what IQ you have? There's all kinds of people in Mensa and so forth who don't have two stones. They don't have two nuts rolling around in their heads to crack, even though they've got all the wonderful little laurels and numbers and awards next to their name. I don't care how high your IQ is. What matters is, can you create goals and can you accomplish those goals? And I've met many a Mensa person who was just super proud of all their little numbers, who is barely surviving on pension or whatever, and they're just still super proud. I wouldn't be so proud. I really wouldn't. Can you set goals? Can you accomplish those goals? Are you contributing to society in a way that is helping as many people as you possibly can, with as much frequency as you possibly can, with as much depth of integrity as you possibly can? Now that's something to pay attention to, and that's very interesting. But the high IQ club people often are absent from that, and I've seen that far too often. All right, so Bad Boss says, don't worry, we have 5G. We ain't worried about that. And, when the satellites are all up in the sky, giving internet access to all those people in the desert who are just dying for the random button on Wikipedia to help with their needs for water and food. Well, let's see what being able to search the internet does in terms of solving the horrible situation with their governance and whatnot, all of which could be easily solved. I mean, for example, if they would stop preventing African countries from getting nuclear power, then you know what I'm at. You know where I'm going with that. What does it matter? That said, I really actually admire some of the imperatives and the ideas behind enabling this, and there certainly is a lot to be said for the technological powers that be outpacing some of these things to the point that accessibility and knowledge reaches them faster than it can be prevented, in order to create revolutions that will, over time, enable more and more people to take care of themselves better and so forth. So it's not clear at all. And again, as I started with this is not a criticism. This is not skepticism. This is not technophobia, what I'm talking about. And my fullest optimism is that really, if we can get people patched into the eternal present, if they can really become more aware, they will naturally start to create a better world. And that's again why I'm jumping on Bernie's IQ point there, because some of the people with the biggest IQs in the world are the least empathetic and the least demonstrative of charitability, even to themselves. So that's a real problem. So Physico says, this will be easy to put into words. Poor people will live in isolated communities, needing to farm their food to survive. The pro is more masters of memory will rise in those communities as they grow. Perhaps. It's a very, very interesting issue. And, one of the things to think about is just how much memory is already involved in farming for survival, farming for a living. This is an interesting thing to ponder and to think about. Bad Boss says, I believe willpower has more advantage than IQ if we really train it. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there's an argument whether willpower even exists and so forth. And then you have the difference between acts of will and free will, right? And one of the things that's so clear is that the ability to set goals and accomplish them is not about free will, and it's not really about acts of will. It's about creating systems that produce outcomes, and that those systems are efficient enough that people can show up to them consistently enough to actually complete the goals while being willing to let go of outcomes, right? Because one of the reasons why that people cannot set and complete goals is because they're hung up on the outcomes. They need to see the end. And this is the admirable part about what's going on with this announcement of Neuralink, which is that, there's a goal there. And even though I've pointed out some issues there in terms of consistency and competence already on display in this particular entrepreneur's track record, there is also a track record of being able to set and complete goals and to do so relatively consistently. And there's also something, powerful about someone who's able to make those damaging admissions, and we need to pay attention to that because a lot of people can't. And a key indicator of competence is the ability to make damaging admissions about oneself. And you'll notice that this is one of the things that I teach all the time. Be willing to make mistakes. Actually embrace mistakes. Be able to try and create a plan for yourself. Often the planning is more important than the plan itself, and it, in fact, probably always is more important than the plan itself, because if you don't do any planning, you're not really going to be able to make forward movement that actually has any meaning. And that can be mini planning or it can be massive planning, but planning is often more important than the plan itself. So there's something to be said about that in this particular initiative, and there's something about people not needing to plan, not needing to train their willpower, not needing to train their IQ, but needing to train the muscles of creating plans and then actually showing up to execute on those plans, and doing so in a way that is aware of the fact that you do not need to be inspired, you do not need to be motivated, you just simply need to show up and get started. And if you ever study theater, one of the things that you'll understand, and it's a very good thing to understand about theater, is that every time you change a scene, you have to start the engine again. The dramatist needs to start the engine again. And that's why usually a scene starts with one emotional state and then ends on another emotional state. And then when you transfer from one scene to another, there's usually something happening in medias res that your brain catches on to. You understand the situation in context so that they don't have to turn the engine on cold all the time, right? So that you stay in the flow of interest. And very, very good dramatists know how to do this. There's many, many tricks. And you can do this with your life. So Hemingway often taught that if you finish your day of writing, finish when you know what's going to happen next in your story, so that when you come to the typewriter, which they used back then, you're going to just be able to start writing because you know where you're going. You don't have to start cold, so to speak. You don't need motivation. You don't need inspiration. That's all part of the intelligence of planning, something that you learn how to do by actually showing up to plan and to execute your plan and understand how to shift and pivot and change your plan. A plan is a flexible thing. It's a living and breathing thing, and it's something that you cannot possibly completely make 100% perfect, because perfectionism is impossible. Perfectionists are not perfect at being perfectionists, and no one else is. So you've got to dive in and be willing to train. It's very, very important. All right. So I think that we've solved the world's problems as much as we're going to do for one day today. If you have anything you want to say before we go, let me know in the chat. Thank you so much, everybody, for the great points today. Physico and Badba and Bernie. And wonderful, wonderful to see some new faces as well. Monst was here again. And thanks again to Crone Woman Walk-In for that super chat. Much appreciated. And well, before I go, probably going to live stream again tomorrow with William here. We're not sure, but we might do a live stream because he's coming to do the photographs for the new book that is getting nearer and nearer to completion. And that's very, very exciting. And so we might do a little live stream just to bring you up to speed on what it is that's going on with that, why it's such a challenge to be able to visualize a large memory project, which had 32 pieces of information, lines of text. So it's actually much more than 32 pieces of information, because all of the individual words needed to be memorized and the meanings of it and so forth. And very interesting challenge to visualize that. I've never seen a book do what I'm trying to do. And so we have the potential for error there. But it's very, very interesting, and I hope that we'll be able to do a live stream about it. If we don't do a live stream tomorrow about it, we will do a live stream eventually. I've been shooting some documentary footage of what we did yesterday in the planning, and probably shoot some of the actual shooting. And he's got some great ideas to help visualize it. I'm so glad that I asked him. I knew he would be the best for it, and it's just one of those things that planning fallacy was definitely something I was guilty of, because I thought it would be done quite a bit sooner. But I realized that I can't even really finish editing the draft without those pictures in place. And I also want it to be the best book that it can possibly be. And then we have to think about like how the images will be, like different colored paper in the center, or et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, I've done a lot of books in my day, but man, oh man, this one's the most challenging of them all so far. And that's a good sign, because the more complicated it gets, the bigger the challenges that one takes on, the more one grows. And if you're not growing, as they say, you're probably dying. And it's always interesting to be doing this work, in particular when I get so many emails. What do you think about Neuralink? Did you see the whole thing with Elon Musk and so forth? And yes, I have, and this live stream is part of that. So thank you everybody who keeps me abreast of what's going on, to make sure that I am watching what's going on and I don't miss anything. So keep your emails coming of articles you read and videos that you watch that you think that I might be able to say something about. And obviously I have blind spots, and there may be some things where I'm dead wrong, so I would love to be corrected about those things. But I don't think that we're going to replace our tradition ever. And even if we do, then I think that there's a potential that it can be very, very positive. And we just need to think about all the things that we already know in the now. And we know a lot in the now that help us, first of all, use our modesty to just outright say we don't know what's coming, and we only can just be in awe of how much we don't know, right? And there are so many components to the world. There's so much meaning that has yet to be generated. There's it's a horrible burden in one sense if you're antsy and afraid and scared of the present moment because your brain is out of control and you haven't trained your brain whatsoever. But if you do have quiet in your mind and you do have some stability mentally, it's the most exciting moment ever, right? You can have criticisms about it, you can have doubts, you can have concerns, you can have issues, you can have things to argue about, etc., etc. But if you just have calm and peace in your mind, it's really, really super exciting. And I'm very excited about these kinds of things. And I think we already have a hive mind in many, many ways. And I don't think I don't think we necessarily have to fear the acceleration of that hive mind, because humans are very, very good at sharing things that enhance the human species and warning each other against things that don't. Now, when I say we're very good at it, that doesn't mean we're perfect at it, but we are quite good at it. We've gotten this far. Think of what an accomplishment it is for this species to get this far. Have we raised the planet as drastically and dramatically as some people think? Maybe, I don't know. But at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that we got this far, right? And how did we do it? We did it by the ability to share the things that enhance the species and warn off against the things that do not. And we are still doing that. That's what humans do. And as long as humans can do that, then maybe we have a fighting chance to get to Mars or whatever it is that we're going to do in order to have a planet to live on after this one expires. But we don't even know that it is going to expire. We certainly have every reason to believe, just based on what we know about physics, etc., that the sun is going to peter out, etc., etc., etc. But the problem is that we don't know that we know that. That is a scientific hypothesis, and there may be there's just too much certainty all across the board. And even though I am a scientific-minded person, and and it almost seems totally certain that the sun will burn out and that we will die a cold death without it, we still just don't know. We don't know that even that will happen, even though we have every reason to believe that it would be so. Belief is a very dangerous proposition. One should get rid of it. The belief, at the end of the day, is the ultimate disease. What I think ultimately is what memory training can bring every person to is a experience of the eternal present. And I hope that you will use memory training, at least in part, for that goal. And there are many videos on the channel where I have shared why that I think that you should do that and how to do it through self-inquiry, through memorizing certain kinds of material. And then, of course, any kinds of material that there's a lot of evidence to show that meditation and memory training are accessing similar parts of the brain, creating similar states. And so I think that you would do very, very well to just adopt that mindset, because there's some great studies that show that, people who clean hotels, for example, if you take a group of them and tell them that they're actually engaged in physical exercise, their bodies get more tone, they lose weight, and they just have the mindset that they're actually getting physical fitness while they're doing labor. Whereas those who don't, they don't lose any weight at all. So it may be that if you take on the frame that anything you memorize is also giving you meditative benefits, you may get more benefits out of that. I don't know, but it's worth doing. And if you can get yourself to do it, and there's lots of videos on this channel that can show you how, if you would meditate while you memorize and memorize while you meditate and use recall rehearsal while you're meditating with information that helps you see the present moment better and be more present to the present moment through a process of self-inquiry, you can feel so much better and have the brain benefits of meditation at the same time and extend that mindfulness into each and every moment so that you do have access to the eternal present. And rest assured that as far as I know and we know, you have access to the eternal present whether you want it or not, so long as you're here, as long as there's a screen through which you perceive the objects in the world. All right, everybody. So thank you, Bad Ba, for your thank you, and I'm glad that you're good. Thanks, everybody else, for being here. Thanks especially to those who were active and engaged. Hit that thumbs up if you haven't already. If you're watching the replay, get involved in the post-show discussion below. And what else? Get subscribed if you're not already. Hit that bell icon so you're notified of future live streams. And come visit me at magneticmarymethod.com. Get the free course at magneticmarymethod.com/YT. And if you're interested more in memory implants and thoughts on that, there's a link in the description below for that. And we will see you again very, very soon. And until then, keep yourself magnetic. Bye-bye.